Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will give another minute and then we will start. Hi, everybody. Just one more minute and then we will start. I just see the numbers going up. Okay, I think that we can start. So thank you so much to all of you for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. My name is Elisanda Balleste, and I am the coordinator of the Global Democracy Coalition. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's launch of our report on the impact of the foreign aid cuts on the global democracy, human rights, governance, and peace-building ecosystem. This report was developed in response to a year of profound uncertainty for our sector. Many organizations across the democracy, rights, governance, and peace-building space have struggled to fully understand the extent of the foreign aid cuts and their implications. For many partners of the coalition, this has been a very painful year, and this report was a way to make sense of the impact on our sector, to document how organizations have navigated this new landscape, and to offer an evidence-based basis for discussing the way forward, which is where our collective efforts must now focus. The report aims to provide the global DRGP sector worldwide, including funders, with an evidence-based picture supported by data and testimonials of the state of the democracy sector following the cuts. It also seeks to offer insight into how democracy-focused organizations are adapting to sustain their work in a shifting financial landscape. And more importantly, it provides recommendations to donors, civil society organizations, and international institutions on how to sustain and rethink democracy support in a changing geopolitical context, identifying where scarce resources should be targeted and highlighting potential unintended consequences of the cuts for global stability. Before continuing, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to the Global Democracy Coalition partners. This has truly been a collective effort. Thanks not only to the three authors, but to the many GDC partners who contributed with their testimonials, perspectives, and data. The report reflects their lived realities, and we are deeply, deeply grateful. Warm thanks, of course, also go to the authors of this report who are with us here today. Annika Silva Leander, the head of International IDEA North America program and permanent observer to the UN, who led this work and brings decades of expertise on global democratic trends. Courtney Pompey, a democracy and governance specialist with extensive experience supporting civil society organizations and election processes in fragile contexts. And Dr. Cassandra Emmons, the Global Democracy Data Advisor at IFES, whose comparative politics and global electoral trends expertise strengthen the analysis, particularly the sections focusing on electoral assistance. And this report is also an example of the kind of collaboration that the Global Democracy Coalition promotes. When IFES and International IDEA realized they were launching similar surveys at the same time, a common occurrence in our sector, they decided to join forces rather to duplicate efforts, maximizing the collective impact. And finally, this report will contribute to the democracy champions everywhere. We want to pay tribute to them, those who supported this cause within USAID and the State Department, and all the defenders around the world who continue to advance democratic values under increasing pressure and repression. This report is dedicated to all of them. So let me now briefly explain how today's session will unfold. We will begin with the presentation of the key findings by the three authors. Annika will present the overall findings, Cassandra will discuss the impact on the electoral assistance sector, and Courtney will present the recommendations on the way forward. And then we will hear from our discussants, Jean, the co-CEO of Accountability Labs, who will share insights from their survey of the aid sector and reflections on civic partners, and Refu, the Executive Director of Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, who will offer perspectives from African civil society on how organizations are experiencing and navigating the cuts. And after that, we will open the floor for an interactive discussion with all of you, and we want to focus on the way forward. So thank you all again for being here and for being part of these truly collective efforts. And with that, I will now hand the floor to Annika to present the key findings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elisanda. Also, warm thanks. I wanted to reiterate the same words that Elisanda expressed. Thanks to all the partners, the 168 partners in the Global Democracy Coalition, and everyone else, including also the reviewers who contributed to this collective efforts. So let me share my screen with you all. And I just want to make sure that you can see the screen.
We can see it.
Perfect. Great. Great. Okay, perfect. So just to reiterate what Sandra said in terms of what we tried to do with this report, it was to provide the global democracy, rights, governance, and peace building sector with an evidence-based picture of how the foreign aid cuts have reshaped the democracy ecosystem, also how organizations are adapting, and what the path forward could look like, both for funders, for civil society organizations, and also for international institutions. The analysis drew on global surveys, like Elisanda mentioned, one conducted by International IDEA, another one conducted by IFES. Together, these two surveys covered 276 organizations across 86 countries. The survey was also based on, the study was also based on key informant interviews from multiple regions, official financial data, and additional surveys conducted by Humanity United, UN Women, Outreach International, HIVAS, and Internews. And together, all these sources offer really the most consolidated view to date on how the entire democracy ecosystem has been affected by the cuts. I'll start with the financial picture. And this has really been the most difficult to make sense of, because a lot of the information on the US aid cuts has not been made publicly available. So we had to puzzle together the information, and there might be some gaps that I just want to caveat this presentation with. As you all know, the US was the largest bilateral funder of foreign aid and the largest democracy assistance donor. And the cuts eliminated around $80 billion in US foreign aid, terminating 86% of USAID awards and nearly 2,000 State Department awards. Across sectors, thousands of projects were shut down, and the democracy assistance projects and sector was the one that suffered the deepest losses. When it comes to the DRGP cuts in particular, there were approximately 1,600 DRGP related grants that were terminated, representing 70% of all such grants, an estimated $14 billion in value, affecting more than 129 countries.
Annika?
Yes.
I'm good. Sorry, it's Courtney. I'm just going to interrupt you. The slides aren't advancing. We don't see the slides as individuals. We just see it as the open workbook. So I think when you tried to maybe put it on slideshow mode, it didn't come
Okay,
through.
thanks for letting me
Yeah.
know.
Yep. We just see the cover slide.
Oh, that is a problem. Let me stop sharing very quickly and I'll retry again. Can you all see?
We can see, but not in slideshow mode. Do you want Nikki to share the presentation?
That might be better. Let me just try one final thing. Yeah, I think it might be better for Nikki to share. I don't know what's happening with my screen sharing, so
No worries.
I'll let Nikki share. In the meanwhile, I'll continue. So I was talking about the cuts to the DRGP related grants. We calculated that there were around 1,600 DRGP related grants that were terminated, and this represented 70% of all such grants, including both the USAID and the State Department grants. An estimated value of $14 billion, affecting more than 129 countries. Almost all USAID grants were terminated, and around half of the State Department DRG awards, but though many of those State Department projects are scheduled to end soon without a clearly articulated continuation strategy. Nikki, if you continue to the next slide and the next slide. Yeah, perfect. So these cuts, the US foreign aid cuts, have occurred in a context of broader contraction of global aid. Germany, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, the UK, and Canada have all announced reductions to manage fiscal pressures and rising defense costs soon after the US announced its cut. So a total of 11 OECD countries are planning cuts between 2025 and 2027. And the OECD projects a drop of ODA from 9 to 17% in 25, on top of what was already a 9% reduction in 2024. But the US cuts differ in three important ways from other countries' foreign aid cuts. They are deeper because it was such a large funder and that many organizations relied heavily on the US funding. They were also very abrupt, occurring literally from one day to the other. And they terminated active projects, whereas most other donors have focused on future commitments. If we go to the next slide, we'll start with a quick overview of the survey results, the combined survey results from the IFES and the IDEA surveys. They really reflect the scale of the disruption. More than 80% of survey respondents reported losing DRGP-related US funding, and nearly half said this funding made up half or more of their organizational budget. I should clarify maybe also that the type of organizations that we covered in both surveys included both local and international civil society organizations, as well as some for-profit contractors, some international organizations, and also some think tanks. Around 40% of survey respondents lost more than half of their total budget, and most of them have been unable to replace it. 42% of the survey respondents also experienced cuts from other donors at the same time that they experienced the US cuts. 65% have laid off staff, and more than half are downsizing. Nearly 70% have reduced programs or services, and almost 40% have cut staff pay. If we go to the next slide and we look at the direct impacts of the cuts, and then I'll talk a little bit about the indirect impacts. These financial shocks have had a profound impact on the global democracy ecosystem. And the first one is that civil society and civic space have been really the hardest hit. And the cuts have accelerated the erosion of civic infrastructure worldwide, weakening thousands of civil society organizations and create what many describe as an existential crisis for civil society. And this contraction is occurring against more than a decade-long trend of democratic decline that both International IDEA and Freedom House and others have already described. Now, organizations in repressive contexts or operating in exile from authoritarian contexts have been particularly affected, especially where alternative donors are scarce. For example, democracy defenders and independent media in or outside of Myanmar. Now, reduced US engagement has also coincided with intensifying repression and legal restrictions on civil society in many countries. And governments on democratic backsliding paths have used the context of civil society vulnerability and reduced international pressure to revive or introduce foreign agent laws. We've seen that in Georgia, in El Salvador, in Peru, and other places. Now, vulnerable groups and human rights defenders, we have to go to the, not just. Yeah, the next slide. So vulnerable groups and human rights defenders have faced severe consequences. A report from UN Women reports that over 60% of women's organizations in crisis settings have suspended or reduced services for survivors of gender-based violence, and nearly half of women-led groups across 44 countries expect to close within 6 months if current trends continue. Now, human rights defenders have lost rapid response mechanisms, legal aid and protection programs. LGBTQ+ organizations in hostile environments, such as Uganda, for example, have lost essential services and are unable to access domestic funding due to restrictive laws. Now, another sector that has been severely affected is the independent media sector. Media outlets in Sudan, Myanmar, El Salvador, and Afghanistan have closed or have had to drastically reduce their operations. And even independent media in Eastern Europe have lost 40 to 90% of their funding. And these cuts reduce the investigative capacity, eliminate the fact-checking abilities, and also compromise journalist safety, creating fertile ground for censorship and disinformation. And what has also happened is that the loss of US funding neutrality requirement when it comes to the editorials quality of the newspapers has created also openings for actors without similar safeguards, including authoritarian states, to enter the independent media space with funding. Now, governance, justice, and anti-corruption sector have also been severely affected, and they have eroded mechanisms for accountability and broadened opportunities for corruption in many places. Now, if we go to the indirect impacts, and that's the last slide for me, they are also equally significant. Now, cuts have undermined or are risking to undermine fragile political transitions by stripping support from civil society, electoral bodies, and also essential service sectors in health and education, for example, at critical and fragile moments of democratic transitions. For example, in places such as Bangladesh, which are also heavily aid-dependent. And this also reflects a broader US retreat from diplomatic engagement more broadly, with reduced pressure on rights violators and decreased participation in multilateral fora. I think somebody has to mute their microphone. And also institutional expertise has been lost as USAID programs have shut and State Department offices and staff have left, and weakening instruments of democratic support long relied on globally. And this retreat of US as a diplomatic actor in support of democratic values globally has created a vacuum that is quickly being filled by authoritarian powers, for example, China and Russia, but also others. And actually several informants in the interviews reported having been approached by Chinese interests to fill funding gaps. And coincided then with democratic donors increasingly tying aid to domestic priorities such as migration and trade. So together, these dynamics represent not only a funding crisis, but a profound geopolitical shift with long-term implications for democracy. worldwide. And now I'll hand over to Cassie, who's going to talk about some of the impacts on the electoral assistance sector. Over to you, Cassie.
Thanks very much, Annika. On the next slide, thank you so much. Like the DRGP sector as a whole, the election sector has been both directly and indirectly impacted by these losses in funding. Historically, many EMBs around the world have received direct technical assistance during all stages of the election cycle from the international non-governmental organizations that are themselves funded by bilateral and multilateral donors. Those organizations, including many that were captured in the survey data that was just presented, lost their funding, which has and will reduce their ability to both support elections globally and comprehensively advise the remaining donors in the space on whom there is now outsized pressure to prioritize among the many consequential elections taking place. Now, for many people after 2024, there was immense election fatigue, especially for those living in the countries that were part of this 2024 mega year of elections. It may have felt as though the next election is far off, and therefore investment in election support isn't as imperative right now. However, we know that this intuition gets two critical things wrong. First, over the past 10 years, there have been an average of well over 100 national elections every single year. So in this chart, I'm showing data not from our surveys, but rather from IFAS's election guide, which you can also find online. In the 2024 mega year of elections, you'll see there were 147 national elections in 78 countries. And of course, some of those were very populous countries. And while that's very high, if you look across a longer period of time, you see that this year in 2025, where we had 106 national elections, we're still right there near the average number year on year. So the point is, there's never a slow election year when we're looking and thinking globally. Second, and more importantly, major investments in ensuring the high-quality election delivery for those elections happen long before Election Day. Most permanent EMBs themselves are institutionally funded through their own national budgets. However, their work is often supplemented by technical experts that come from a few specialized large INGOs. This support typically accounts for a very small proportion of the overall cost of conducting an election, but is uniquely focused on helping the EMB find efficiencies in their work. So again, while the EMB budgets might not have been directly impacted by reductions in foreign aid, their partner INGOs are among the organizations whose funding has been greatly reduced. Election observation missions, similarly, they're on different timelines than technical support, but they also require planning and investment far ahead of Election Day. So to put it more plainly, there's a seasonality to elections and thus to support for elections. That means we have yet to fully appreciate all the ways that the reduction in funding and capacity will impact the election sector. However, a few main impacts are starting to emerge and become clear. First, we're seeing an impact on the international election observation space. So a central tenet of democracy promotion for the better part of the last 3 decades, this work and the actors who do it have become targets of rising authoritarians in the current era of democratic backsliding. Now, the resources for that work are also shrinking. So we know that some experienced and well-regarded institutions that conducted international election observation have been unfortunately forced to cease observations altogether. For others, such as those part of IGOs, the pool of funds that was traditionally available for those observation missions is dwindling as member states reconsider their foreign aid budgets and corresponding contributions to those pools. The new reality, therefore, could mean a reduction in scale, meaning only sending smaller missions, a restriction in the focus of those observation missions and reports, or reducing the number of missions overall. Second, there have been and there will be impacts on election planning and operations. So under the best of circumstances, democratic election processes are constantly evolving, responding to new needs, new challenges, and changing sociopolitical environments. Technical experts from INGOs have historically offered EMB's advice around modifying routine administrative procedures, such as ways to modernize election result processes or how best to expand out-of-country voting options, for instance, or how to reconfigure their own internal structures while protecting their independence. Such long-term election reforms, however, require foresight and dedicated planning, usually over a period of 3 to 4 years, in order to effectively test, pilot, launch, and socialize changes, importantly, so that they are not compromising the integrity of the next election. In some cases now, EMBs may only have 3 to 5 months to prepare for an election, and that's due to a number of different causes. But the situation is going to be particularly challenging when their former international partners are not as readily able to step in to support. Technical experts from INGOs have also provided EMBs with comparative experiences and lessons, particularly in dealing with emerging issues, such as addressing information integrity issues and cybersecurity threats. Now, preparation for these potential crises also requires more than just procuring a new piece of technology. While that might be imperative, it is a successful resilience strategy also requires training, technical know-how, and expertise in recognizing as well as responding to those threats. So these investments and preparations can't be made overnight. They require, again, that foresight and time between when you would select a new technology, procure it, and then election day, so that the officials can learn it, they can communicate it to poll workers, to voters, and to candidates as relevant. So this is the kind of support that INGOs have historically offered. But the new operating environment for elections has put EMBs at a deficit in meeting these emerging threats and preparing for the perhaps known unknowns when we're talking about the realm of AI, cybersecurity, and the complex information environment. So overall, the reduction in funding for the election sector is not only going to impact EMBs, election officials, or observers. It's going to impact the broader elections community, which is to say everyone, political candidates, political parties, and importantly, the voters, also stand to suffer if the quality of existing election processes stalls or potentially declines. For example, less investment in strategic communications by election officials to the public could lead to downstream distrust of the elections. At a moment when we know the quality of free and fair elections is already in decline globally, if we look at a few existing metrics and indices, including international ideas, election officials are already fighting this uphill battle in meeting their mandates and the expectations of their citizens. As a whole, then, the quality and promise of elections is likely to deteriorate without more international support in place. So this leaves us with the question of what we, the international democracy support community, can do. And for that, I'll hand it over to Courtney.
Thanks, Cassie. Thanks again to International IDEA for having me work on this project with them. It's been a labor of love, I think, for most of us for the last 8 months going through this process and being able to produce this report for you all. And it's lovely to see so many familiar names in the participants list with us here today. I want to try to get us back on track on time. We've had so much information to share, and I want us to get to our discussants. So I'm going to highlight a few of the recommendations that we gathered from our survey respondents and our key informant interviews. And during that process, we had recommendations from those that from respondents in 3 main categories: recommendations to civil society itself, recommendations to the international community, and recommendations to the donors community. So you'll see those 3 broad buckets. You all can read these recommendations here on the screen. I know you've all dug deeply into the report already that's been shared. And so I wanted to highlight a few of the recommendations for each of these categories and provide some anecdotal evidence to really kind of drive it home. So when we ask civil society what recommendations would they have for other organizations similar to themselves or other civil society organizations at local, national, regional, or even international levels, these were the recommendations that trickled to the top. I wanted to share that for many of them, these organizations have really highlighted creative collaborations. Organizations are really trying to think differently about how they work with each other, how they work when there's competitions for other resources, how they can be innovative in the way that they're seeking their own funding diversity, whether that's in collaborations with each other or individually as organizations. There was a lot of discussion from each organization that I spoke with around creating networks of solidarity. I think a lot of civil society historically has always had, methods of building solidarity amongst each others around the specific issues that they're working on and the specific advocacy or organizing efforts that they're reform efforts that they're pursuing. But in this current era where there's been less funding, the sense for solidarity for around self-care, self-help, wellness, sort of balancing what's going on had really been significant. And I found it very unique as someone who's worked in civil society for more than 25 years, that this was something that my fellow civil society organizations were wanting to be highly emphasized, was around building new efforts for solidarity. And part of that was within mutual support. They also emphasized very strongly about cross-sector partnerships, that in many ways funding cycles and donor support and international support was very siloed around particular issues, around particular streams of support, whether it was around technical support to particular organizations working only on particular types of reform or on particular issues, and that they recognized that there was a need to actually build cross-sector partnerships in ways that look different from before, in order to help protect from the shifting political winds that might impact funding, but also in order to create, there was the recognition that this offered an opportunity to create stronger partnerships that could also weather domestic issues within their own countries as well in a way that could be new and innovative. Next slide. We also solicited, the next slide for funders. Yeah, thank you. We also solicited suggestions for what organizations that we spoke with and respondents that we spoke to, what recommendations they might have for funders. And this will come as a surprise to many of the people on this call, if any of you, that loud and clear, we heard there had to be more flexible support for core funding, that in order to weather the political storms that might create large changes in funding cycles like we saw this past year, and that we had been seeing, as Annika mentioned, over actually a bit of a longer trajectory with other bilateral and multilateral donors, that organizations need to have more flexibility in how support is both received and how they account for that support. So simplifying bureaucracy, providing greater flexibility in how funds are used, providing a diverse funding mechanism so that there is different types of funding structures that can come the way of the organizations actually doing the work on the ground. There was also a strong support when I asked very specifically to some organizations, if you had an suggestion to a funder of how they would do things differently. Loud and clear, I heard from local organizations at both the local level, I would say subnational level, grassroots, grass tops, and at national level in the different countries that the GDC operates in, is that funders need to find a way to hear voices from those that are actually doing the work in a way that's different than they had done in the past. So I know many of us have been working on localization issues for quite some time and trying to reimagine how we co-developed, co-create projects with organizations. And this was something that was repeated loud and clear from them, that they are still eager to have a larger seat at the table in order to have a stronger hand in the type of funding that they know they need and to do the work that they know needs to be done in their countries. So I'll put that out there. Can we go to the next slide on international community? Great. And so the final bucket of recommendations that we asked respondents to focus on was around the international community. And again, this won't surprise anybody on this call that there is a leadership gap with the US pulling out many organizations felt that this leadership gap was being felt even at the grassroots level. So the recommendation is for the international community to step back in, not to step back, and to figure out ways to broaden the pro-democracy alliance. That using a big tent approach needs to cross ideological divides. We need to be the bridge builders, the facilitators, the networkers that we all say that we are in the international space. But we need to rethink how we're doing that so that we are being true to that methodology and really pulling together more folks to help weather this sort of storm as these different political winds shift. And then we need to be better connectors in the conversation on democracy issues and make sure we are hearing from a plurality of voices, not the usual suspects, and to connect to the local, regional, and global levels in ways that we haven't done before. We need to be more deliberate, and if that means having more conversations, that's what people wanted to hear from. So I'll leave it at that. I know we have some discussion points that Jean and Rafu are going to bring us towards, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annika, Cassie, and Courtney. It's really an amazing job that you have done, and thank you for taking us over the numbers, the reasoning, and now the recommendations. But now we want to hear a little bit of a reflection. So we have two discussants that we are very eager to listen to, and the first one is Jean, the co-CEO of Accountability Lab, and she will be making some reflections on the key findings of the report, but also on the key findings of their own survey of the aid sector as a whole. So, Jean, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks all. And thank you so much to the GDC and the broader community for the chance to reflect alongside so many friends who are living this in real time. So when the When Aid Fades report reminds us that this is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's also about an ecosystem where the cuts have weakened civil society and independent media, stripped protections from human rights defenders, and emboldened authoritarian regimes that now feel fewer external checks on repression. And I think we've heard this through our through the interventions earlier this morning. The data also tracks with what we found through the multiple rounds of data collection that the lab has done through the Global Aid Freeze Tracker, which we did with support with Humantum and a number of other organizations. Across 800 something respondents, while this initially was envisioned just to create a very quick snapshot of who was affected genuinely just within our tiny little community, it quickly became a source to capture the human side of this shock. And so the survey, which now includes hundreds of organizations, about 800 and something, shows that how thin the ice really is and really concurs with what the When Aid Fades report found, that half of respondents had less than 3 months of operating reserves. Organizations just weren't going to make the end of the year. Taken together, When Aid Fades and the Global Aid Freeze data tells us a consistent story, that this is not a marginal correction in aid flows. It's going to be a systemic shock to the global democracy ecosystem. Accountability Lab, for those of you that don't know, is a global translocal network that exists to make governance work for people by supporting active citizens, responsible leaders, and accountable institutions. So we sit sort of at two worlds. We are an implementing partner in all the countries in which we work, as well as with our team here in the US, but we also, and so therefore we experience the aid cuts, but we're also a connector between donors, civic actors, local civic actors, and sort of our own community. And so there were a few things I think that both reflect what is in the report and things that we found that I think have become clear. Business as usual in democracy support is over. A model built around large, centralized US government instruments that are heavily projectized and over-compliance driven is not really fit for the world in which that pillar can just disappear in 3 months. When aid phase calls for donors to provide more flexible core support, streamline requirements, and fund local organizations directly, our data echoes this too. Organizations need diversified, flexible funding. They need smaller overheads in order to survive this freeze better. And those that are able to do that have been a lot more successful in overcoming this than those that are built entirely around single large contracts. And so we need to figure out how to do this again and better. We also have to think more seriously about transitions. Not every organization is going to survive this. We know just from the data that many organizations are not, but we also know that in the coming months, we're going to see another wave of organizations that just aren't going to survive this. And so, where resilience has become a code word for asking people to just do more with nothing, what we're really also looking at is how can we preserve the ecosystem so that we're not having to reinvent the wheel again when things stabilize a little bit. And so that's why we started the Civic Strength Partners program, which is a collaboration between Accountability Lab, Development Gateway, which is an IREX venture, and Digital Public. And it's designed as a sort of partnership matching support network for civil society and social change organizations that are trying to navigate major transitions, whether that means restructuring, a merger, or in many cases, winding down or creating strategic relationships with one another. CSP, for short, aims to provide resources and professional services and infrastructure so that organizations can protect what really matters, their people, their data, their intellectual property, their relationships, and their legacies. And so in many cases, it may mean triage support to manage an abrupt funding loss, help support a merger with another organization that might close or is also experiencing similar cuts, or just some expert guidance to archive sensitive digital assets safely when programs must end. And so, we have about 200 and something organizations within our pipeline, and we've learned a few things from them over a couple of thousand hours of conversations. And those are sort of that early engagements and research have shared that decisions are currently being made without the full picture. We're under pressure. Organizations are acting before alignment, data, or relationships. And I think this is why this report is so important, because it's going to help us think better about how we make decisions. Human dynamics are constantly undervalued. Changing plans overlook trust, shifting identities and beliefs, behavior change, emotions are actually the real levers of endurance. And so we need to make sure that we can protect these things and take them seriously as we move forward. Expertise and infrastructure exist, as Courtney said, but they rarely connect and are hard to find. And we are creating a lot of fatigue by duplicating each other's work all the time. So I think we need to think more carefully about what these relationships look like. And I think, adaptation is misunderstood. Change is often treated as a failure rather than evidence of resilience. And so just because an organization fails doesn't mean, or has to close because of this, doesn't mean that they failed. It just means that they've had to make some changes, but we cannot lose what the essence was, or the essence of what they did and what they were. So I think as I conclude, what does this mean for the global democracy ecosystem and the way forward? I'd like to highlight 4 ideas. These are not exhaustive, and I think many of them are repetitions of what other people have said, but sort of in just a different voice. We need to treat civic infrastructure as essential infrastructure. The report is clear. Weakening civil society, independent media is not a side effect. It's a core impact of the cuts with long-term consequences for stability and development globally. Democracy support needs to be reframed as not a nice to have after the basics, but one of the basics. However, this can't just be the work of DRG-focused or DRGP-focused CSOs. We need really to live the idea that strong civic infrastructure is everybody's business, and we need to work hard to engage the private sector. Issues of rule of law, freedom of movement, freedom of speech and assembly are critical for businesses too. The public sector, in particular the professional civil service, are as badly affected by a lot of this craziness as we are. And so we need, and as much as we need to create our, engage our own communities. So we need to think about how we work, not about bringing these people into our space, but how can we use what we've learned to bring it into their space so that it makes sense for them in the context that they're living and working in. Secondly, we need to rebalance and reimagine power and resources. While large US government grants were helpful for scale, as noted earlier, they come with large bureaucratic burdens that were placed on recipients, and thus minimizing the pool of those that could even apply for them in the first place. There's also, they were also not particularly encouraging of cross-donor or organizational collaboration outside the formal grant or proposal structure. So we now have the opportunity to take a new path. The data shows that direct, flexible, multi-year support is critical. We also need to prioritize a non-duplicative, elbows-down approach which values collaboration amongst the doers and the thinkers and those that are able to manage complex financial systems. So we need organizations that are weaving language, skills, evidence, and peer learning models between these doers and thinkers. Thirdly, we need to build an ecosystem of transitions, not just grants. If we accept that some organizations are going to merge or transform or close, then we need services like Civic Strength Partners, but also its equivalents around the world to make these processes humane, strategic, and protective of our knowledge. Through all the reimagination that has gone this year, we have some really good ideas as to what the future of the field looks like. And there are lots of organizations across the ecosystem who've been doing this critical work unseen for decades. So let's find them. Let's make sure they don't disappear so we don't need to relearn what they already have during their time. And with this, I'd like to make just a small little plug for the Civic Wayfinder LinkedIn campaign that Accountability Lab is running with a bunch of other people. Find these organizations, tell us about them, tell others about them. The biggest thing that happened for many of organizations, particularly within the global majority, is they lost their program offices, they lost their connections to decision makers. And LinkedIn right now seems to be the place where we can do it. So let's do it. And then finally, we need to use evidence to argue for a new settlement on democracy funding. Aid freeze has generated a wave of data, along with the tracker and when aid fades. And so the humanitarian, with other humanitarian impact studies and more. And so together they make a case for that abrupt politicized cuts are not just morally costly, they're also really inefficient. And so we need to reinvest in democratic governance, accountability, and civic space. So that reinvestment in this is actually some of the most cost-effective thing that we can do for the long-term peace and development. So in short, that when aid fades, democracy doesn't have to fade with it. And so if we listen to what the data is telling us, we need to center the experiences of local partners that allow organizations not only to survive this moment, but to shape what comes next. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Jean. This really resonates with what the coalition has been hearing from many of the organizations, and of course, coming not just from the report, but also from your surveys and your information. It's very valid and compelling to listen that the community is actually seeing what we hear, like in everyday talks about how organizations are coping. And your point on resilience, that resilience should not be just keep going until you burn out. It's, I think, that very important. Thank you for your 4 points. Could you please maybe share the link in the chat? I think that it would be very, very well accepted by our audience. Thank you so much, Jean. And last but not least, Rafiu, we are very happy to have you here. Rafiu is the Executive Director of Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, and he will share how his organization was impacted by the cuts, how they have navigated the new funding reality, and what strategies they have adopted to continue operating. So, Rafiu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Elsanda. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. As rightly introduced, I work for Building Blocks for Peace Foundation. We're a youth-led nonprofit organization working on human rights, justice, peace, and security in Nigeria. And more recently, we're also extending our programming to the West African sub-region. Some of our activities at Building Blocks for Peace Foundation include research, organizing, convening for activists and civic actors, policy dialogues, support for human rights defenders, capacity building for young people on community organizing and nonviolence, among others. All this we do through support from local and international partners, including US instruments, directly and indirectly. Since the announcement of the USAID court, the work that we do at Building Blocks of Peace Foundation has been severely affected. It has affected our ability to continue to implement our democracy-focused and youth-led peace-building interventions. Some of our projects around elections, around civic space, have had to be altered or suspended for now. We have previously, secured grants from the U.S. Embassy in Abuja for some of our election-related projects, but that relationship, could not continue because of the funding freeze that we now have. And it's not just for us at Building Blocks of Peace Foundation. It's also something that we are also seeing with many of our civil society partners, youth-led civil society partners across West Africa. And I'm happy that this was also captured in the report. And for me, I think that the decline of the funding that we're seeing is also, whether directly or indirectly, responsible for the increase in anti-democratic tendencies that we're seeing, particularly across West Africa. Some of us, saw what happened recently in Guinea-Bissau, where, the military also came to announce a coup, together with the existing situation in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and in the Niger Republic. And what is, court, what it means is that it reduces the capacity of civil society actors to push back on some of these anti-democratic tendencies. So if this continues, then of course, we should expect more authoritarian tendencies or more, military takeovers in the region, especially when those who are supposed to be defenders of the civic space lack the capacity to do so. Another thing that we have also, we are seeing, especially in our own context in Nigeria, which I also think that the reports indirectly also speaks to, is that we're also seeing an increased risk in the operating environment. Beyond the funding challenges, the policy shift has, indirectly contributed to a more hostile civic space for us. Nigerian CSOs, including Building Blocks Peace Foundation, are facing growing mistrust and political scrutiny. You recall that when this whole, funding cut was announced by the US government, part of what was also used to justify was that some of the fundings were also, used to fund, terrorist activities, particularly in the northeastern part of Nigeria. And for us, this is something that we have to also deal with among the communities that we serve. Many of them are losing, support for us. They are losing trust in us. Now we are faced with trying to, explain to the communities that we serve that what we do is purely for humanity and not, in any way connected to any terrorism, as it were. So this is also making local and individual fundraising very difficult for us as we begin to look for alternatives. So there is no doubt we have been impacted. Many of our programs have stalled, as the reports rightly mentioned. Staff are leaving, programs are closing. But of course, the need in our society continue to rise. And for us, we are looking for ways to ensure that we adapt and respond to the situation that we have at hand. So we're investing a lot in organizational resilience and capacity building, particularly for our staff, in terms of designing long-term strategies for fundraising and putting in place a good financial plan. Another thing that we're doing is to improve our internal governance and operational sustainability, which we think is also very useful at this critical point. One thing that I saw that you also amplified in the report is the need to also leverage resources, leverage connections that exist within networks, whether networks at the local level, networks at the regional level, or global level. And this is something that we do at Building Blocks of Peace Foundation. We're, increasingly looking for relevant networks to join, not necessarily because of funding, but because of other support that we can also benefit, whether it's technical, whether it's solidarity, whether it's advocacy. So this is also one thing that we are currently doing. We're investing in, coalitions and networks that can help buffer against this external funding shock that we are all faced with. So let me just thank you again for the reports. And then look forward to supporting in terms of dissemination. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Rafiu, and thank you for sharing your experience, and thank you for also reminding us of the consequences that this can have, and reminding us how they are using narratives for communities to lose trust in organizations that are actually trying to strengthen democracy and to bring a better living to the society. So thank you so much, Rafiu, and I want to open the space for questions, and I would like for you that are here today to think about, like, how can we look beyond budget cuts? How have these shifts reshaped the organization's strategic priorities or partnerships, or how this has reshaped the ways that you're working? Maybe you could also share what additional impacts, apart from those mentioned by the report or by Jean or Rafiu, have you observed as a result of the cuts in your country or in your region in general? And of course, what strategies could we think about, or what strategies have proven most effective for you and which ones have not proved effective, so that we can get some advice for the organizations that are still going through this. So the floor is open. If you have questions for the panelists, or if you want to share your experience, please go ahead. Anyone that has
There are hands up already.
Oh, perfect. I have not seen it. Good. Abdul Salah, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I am from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and it is my great opportunity to talk about Bangladeshi democracy and the present situation, including the scientific report and your opinion. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, that's good. So at first, I would like to say about the Gen Z revolution across South Asia. You know, already Bangladesh also youth organized such kind of movement against the Hasina regime, and similarly in the Nepal, the next part of this revolution we saw in Nepal, and there the youth also organized the similar movement. In both movements, I do not want to emphasize on the Nepalese movement, but I would like to say about the Bangladeshi movement. During the movement, the youth organized it for the democracy, for the human rights, for the freedom of speech. They would like to ensure the rights of the people, rights of the civil society, rights of the media, rights of the journalists, writers, and everyone. But in the post-revolution period, the scenario is different, because most of the cases Islamists are dominating the public sphere, the political sphere, the military, and the other also organization that needed to be point out in order to show the real scenario of Bangladesh. So most of the cases, even I myself, I am not a part of any political organization. I am a writer and I am a university teacher. I also suffered the same thing. Mob attacked me in my university campuses, on my university campus, and because I wrote a post editorial in Bangladeshi newspaper, and I criticized the government decision in the post-July revolution. I also criticized the same thing in the previous government. They also try to make obstacle for me, and I faced the same thing in the post-revolution period by the youth. So in this case, I would like to notice you to or on the issue, those who demonstrated for the democracy, for the human rights, for the freedom of speech, for the civil society's right, for the writer rights, for the journalist rights during the movement. Some part of the youth are violating their oath in the post-movement period. So we need to be notice this point to the civil society organization across the globe so that they can organize any campaign. I think we need to organizing counseling to the youth, those who participate in the movement, Gen Z revolution, because they are suffering, they are suffered by the violence, so they are not mentally in good position in the post-revolution period. So we need to be organize such kind of counseling session or counseling course on anything, because that I feel. But in Bangladesh, nobody organized such kind of thing. Even not only the domestic, any political party, not only in the any civil society organization. I do not have any fund, so I wanted to be, but I do not have any fund. I cannot do anything. So I feel this. So even not the global organization, I already follow the many organizations, including your organization. Nobody think about this, but it need urgently as soon as possible, because youth are demotivated. They are involved in corruption. They are involved in violence. They are involved in many things that is not good for the democracy. That is not good for the human rights. That is not good for the civil society or the nation. So I would like to notice you, or please note this point. You can organize any, this is my proposal. If you would like to organize any such kind of counseling session, I will try to help you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Abdul Salah. And I think that you bring a point that we all have noticed, that it's the mental health issues and like what this cuts have created in our sector, and how pressured we are, people losing their job, but also people staying in their job and having to deliver way more. So thank you so much for bringing this point. And I think that it is a wonderful idea, thinking about organizing campaigns, organizing like counseling sessions to like youth, but also I think that for the whole sector would also be important. So thank you for bringing that up. Kevin.
Yeah, this is such an awesome initiative. I really appreciate you guys undertaking it. It helps us kind of like level set about what's happened and maybe where we might go next. I guess I had a question for you all kind of involved in the interview process with a lot of organizations, a little bit about the vibes, at least from the support community and the promotion community in US, everywhere else, et cetera. We've had this discussion with folks here in Washington at times about, you can counter what's happened, you can rebuild after what's happened, or you can reimagine the support system. And I'm kind of curious where on the spectrum you found organizations, especially those who are involved in the support system, whether it's financial resources, otherwise, where they are on that spectrum of, and this kind of gets to Courtney's comment about localization and things like that being some new ways to lean into. And so I don't know if you could just comment a little bit about where you think folks are at on that kind of maybe continuum of grief.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. Who wants to take it? Courtney, maybe?
Sure, I can start, and then if Annika or Cassie want to fill in. I mean, Kevin, I think it's a fantastic question, and one that I was actually mentioning to someone at an event I was at last night, that I think that those in the support space are still in a bit of kind of shock. I feel like that we're still a little deer in headlights about what's the right move, and we're still a little constrained, I think, by the bureaucracy that we've all lived within on how we provide support, especially from the kind of the US side, and those that have been constrained by donor requirements or donor bureaucracy. But that the moment is really right now for that reimagination, and I think a rejuvenation, and to kind of break those free of those chains of that bureaucracy from the past. That's sort of where I would say most of the support that folks that I've spoken to in the last 10 months kind of have been, and they've kind of moved towards that people know that we need to rethink how this works. But we've been a little constrained by kind of the norms that we've all had to operate in around funding and how funding is allocated, how it's accounted for, all of that, and that we're in that kind of a reimagination phase, that let's give ourselves some space to think differently. But I think we have to give ourselves permission to do that. So that's where I would say some of the conversations have been. I don't know, Annika or Cassie or even Jean, I feel like this came up in a session we were at right before Thanksgiving, Jean, that we were in, may also have some ideas.
Thank you, Courtney. Annika.
Thanks for raising this issue, Kevin. And I think there are many different conversations happening right now, and I think they differ a little bit depending on the context. And as International IDEA, we are part, and I've been lucky to be part of many of the US-based conversations on thinking about the way forward for democracy assistance. Those conversations look a little bit different given the massive scale of the cuts and the uncertainty about the strategy going forward. We've also been part as IDEA in many conversations about democracy assistance on the other side of the Atlantic with European donors. And I think there the conversation is a little bit different. I mean, in the US conversations, I would say the focus, it has very much been on reimagining, and it's an ongoing conversations. I haven't necessarily, given the uncertainty of the funding landscape, I think we're not yet there. I'm counting myself as part of those conversations also in terms of we need to reimagine, we are reimagining, but exactly how that new image and strategy that will come out of that reimagining process, I don't think that we're there yet. And it's difficult to be there unless we have more information and more certainty about an articulated strategy on the way forward. In Europe, it's there's also conversations about reimagining, but also about refocusing. I mean, refocusing and also how to do more because the needs are greater with less. So how to be more efficient, but also on the refocusing, because a lot of European donors are talking about the importance of, I mean, one is prioritizing sectors, given that the needs are so significant in many of the sectors, and many of the more visibly life-saving sectors like health and humanitarian. So prioritizing the scarce resources that are left, but also refocusing. What I'm hearing in terms of the refocusing is a lot about linking aid to trade, much more proactively, and the trade interests also of the donor countries, as well as linking aid to security conversations that, of course, in Europe also are very active right now, and also linking aid to migration in some countries, also re-migration processes. So, I do think that it's important that we continue to hold these conversations. Also, a lot of organizations are discussing also in the Global South about how to reimagine. And so we need to continue those conversations so that we reimagine something that is is better than what we had before, but builds on the strength of what was there, and then addresses the weaknesses. Because I think that there were a lot of things that were done well in the past. Let's not discard everything, but where we saw gaps and weaknesses, let's fill those. And I think, just to end, I think something that IDEA is working a lot on is exploring and piloting new forms of democracy assistance. So given that we are a member state organization and intergovernmental organizations, we've been piloting, and we aim to expand that a lot on peer exchanges. So peer exchanges between countries, and we have member states from the Global South and from the North. And for example, in the election sector, many of them are facing very similar challenges independently of their level of democratic maturity or the age of their democracies. So their countries are facing foreign interference, and they're facing challenges linked to disinformation and the spread of AI tools and so on. So we've been holding a series of peer exchange dialogues and discussions and training programs between countries. But I think that that's something also to think about for civil society. I think that there's so much knowledge in civil society around the world to think about how to share that knowledge between civil society organizations. And then the second thing and last thing is the retreat of the US from the democracy assistance space. The report documents all the negative consequences that brings, but it also provides an opportunity for other leadership to step in to fill that void. And the report mentions authoritarian powers trying to fill in that void. But what we are working on in IDEA is to ensure that that void is filled actually by democratic forces and democratic governance, also in the Global South. Not only in the Global South, but since Global South countries have been less vocal, they have been recipients of aid rather than active agents of how that aid is designed and formed. And so to encourage all our member states, including from the Global South, to take more of a leadership role in supporting democracy on their terms. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika. I don't know if Cassie or Jean, you want to add something just to finalize? No, it's fine. So there was a question in the chat, but I think that Courtney has already answered. Is there any other question, any other reflection? Yes, Anas?
Hi, thank you for the panelists and the discussants for the presentation. It's been quite insightful. Just to make sure, am I audible clearly enough? Amazing. My name is Anas Dabbas. I'm a researcher and fellow at the Politics and Society Institute, an independent think tank in Jordan, focusing on building bridges between policymakers, stakeholders, and academics. And currently, from my personal positionality as a predoctoral researcher, I'm extremely curious on what the panelists and discussants think, or what recommendations they have for academics.
Thank you so much, Anas, for that question. And I am going to ask Annika to answer that because she has been very involved with different universities in the US. Annika, please go ahead.
I think what we've seen in the past couple of months is a lot of US universities engaging and becoming democratic actors in a way. both globally and domestically. And many of them have actually joined the Global Democracy Coalition because they want to be part of a global democracy conversation, and also make sure that the knowledge, the scientific knowledge that they are generating on democracy building and democracy strengthening makes it to practitioners, democracy practitioners and policymakers. So we've been very encouraged by that, by the active participation of US universities in the Global Democracy Coalition. And we would really encourage academic institutions and researchers and research centers and think tanks also from the other regions of the world to join in this conversation, so that the voices that are heard are diverse and from many regions of the world, and also so that academic knowledge makes it into the policy space, because often it stays in the academic space and doesn't inform the policy making. And right now we need lots of good ideas, and many of those are shaped in the academic space. IDEA has been doing some of this work. We just released a report yesterday that looks at the sort of the business case for democracy. So we're looking at both our own data, but also the scholarly evidence, the most recent scholarly evidence that shows how democracy is contributing to shared prosperity around the world. And the purpose of that publication is we have some new data based on our own data, but we're also really collecting, synthesizing the latest academic evidence in this field to make it digestible and accessible to policymakers. And so those kind of initiatives we would really welcome, and just having more of these research organizations also join the coalition to benefit practitioners on the ground with their research. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Annika. And Cassandra, you will close the event. Go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. Just briefly on the engagement with academic point, at IFAS, we also have a lot of coordination with different democracy centers that are within universities around the world. I think the partnership and the exchange of information, doing exactly the kind of translating, so to speak, that Annika was just mentioning between the academic research and the practitioner space is something that we also do a lot of, and are very fortunate to have those connections. But I would also say that academia has also fallen under a lot of restraint right now. Funding for academic research has also been reduced dramatically. And so if anything, as sort of a closing out comment, just expressing solidarity across these two sectors, academia and then the global or the democracy, rights, and governance sector. We're all kind of in this together. We all are thinking about ways to make our societies more democratic and more responsive, and I think we'll continue to do that through the various networks that have been mentioned. So that's it for me, except for a big thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you so much to my co-authors. We're so glad that this report is out in the world. We hope that it'll be a resource for all of you to take into your own efforts, and we remain open for further conversation on anything that was in it.
Thank you so much, Cassie. The link to the report is in the chat. Thank you so much for your time. We know that we are 5 minutes over time. Thank you so much for the contributions, for your questions. And let's stay connected, continue this conversation, and most importantly, let's commit to collective action. So thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day or the evening, and see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.